If you grew up in the 1960s Britain, you witnessed tragedies that shaped a generation forever. From the horrifying moment an entire Welsh school vanished beneath a mountain of coal waste to mysterious cave disasters and catastrophic fires that rewrote safety laws, these events burned themselves into the national consciousness. Did you know that one of these disasters was predicted by a young girl who drew pictures of black clouds covering her school just days before she died? Today we're uncovering the shocking details, the covered-up controversies, and the untold stories of heroism that emerged from Britain's darkest decade. On October 21, 1966, the clock in Pantglas Junior School had just ticked past 9:15 a.m. when pupils heard what sounded like thunder. Within seconds, 150,000 tons of liquefied coal waste cascaded down the mountainside at 80 miles per hour, engulfing the school and 20 houses. The black avalanche killed 144 people, including 116 children who'd just finished singing All Things Bright and Beautiful at morning assembly. What makes this tragedy particularly gut-wrenching is that it was entirely preventable. The National Coal Board had been warned repeatedly about the unstable tip perched above the village. Springs beneath tip number 7 had been turning the waste into a ticking time bomb for years. Local residents had complained, teachers had worried, and just 3 weeks earlier a petition signed by mothers had been sent to the authorities. The response? Complete indifference. Here's the controversial part that still makes blood boil. Lord Robens, chairman of the National Coal Board, didn't even bother showing up until the day after the disaster. When he finally arrived, he lied to journalists, claiming nothing could have been predicted. Meanwhile, internal documents later revealed the NCB knew exactly how dangerous these tips were. They'd had 17 previous tip slides across Wales, though none had hit populated areas. The aftermath exposed the ugly underbelly of British bureaucracy. The Aberfan Disaster Fund raised £1.75 million from donations worldwide, but the government initially demanded £150,000 from it to remove the remaining tips, essentially making the bereaved community pay for their own safety. It took 30 years before this money was repaid, and even then, without interest. Perhaps most haunting were the premonitions. 8-year-old Errol Mai Jones had told her mother about a dream where something black had come down all over her school. She died at her desk 2 days later. These stories, dismissed as coincidence by officials, were documented by psychiatrist Dr. John Barker, who collected 76 credible accounts of precognitive dreams about Aberfan. June 24, 1967, started as a perfect Saturday for caving in the Yorkshire Dales. 6 experienced cavers entered Mosdale Caverns near Grassington, excited to explore one of Britain's most challenging underground systems. What they didn't know was that a freak thunderstorm was about to turn their adventure into Britain's worst caving disaster. The cave system, known for its tight crawls and notorious marathon passage, becomes a death trap when it rains. As torrential rain hammered the moors above, millions of gallons of water funneled into the cave's narrow entrance. The 6 men, aged between 17 and 26, were trapped over a mile inside when the flood pulse hit. Here's what the official reports don't emphasize. Rescue attempts were catastrophically mismanaged. The local caving club arrived first, but were ordered to wait for official rescue teams. By the time permission was granted, water was already roaring through the entrance at 50 cubic feet per second. Volunteers who tried to enter were literally blown back out by the force of water. The bodies weren't recovered for over a month. When cave divers finally reached them, they found the 6 men had made it to a small air pocket where they'd huddled together. Scratch marks on the walls showed their desperate attempts to climb higher as water rose. Most controversially, the cave was later sealed with concrete, but not before souvenir hunters had stripped it of formations, showing grotesque disrespect to what had become a grave. At 10:45 a.m. on June 28, 1960, an explosion ripped through Six Bells Colliery in Monmouthshire, instantly killing 45 miners. The blast was so powerful it shot flames 100 feet up the shaft, and the concussion was felt in homes 2 miles away. Rescue teams found men who'd been thrown 50 yards by the blast force. The official cause? A spark from a shot-firing operation igniting coal dust. But here's what they didn't advertise. Inspectors had noted dangerous dust levels just weeks before. The mine management's response was to schedule cleaning when production allowed. In other words, profit before lives. The same attitude that would lead to Aberfan 6 years later. What really stings is that coal dust explosions were entirely preventable by 1960. The technology existed. Stone dust barriers, better ventilation, wet cutting, but implementation cost money. The 45 men who died that day were sacrificed on the altar of the National Coal Board's balance sheet. Now, before we dive into more forgotten tragedies, if you're finding these untold stories from Britain's past fascinating, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Trust me, what comes next includes a disaster so bizarre that the government tried to classify the details for 50 years. When Hell Came to Scotland, March 28, 1960, Glasgow. A warehouse containing over 1 million gallons of whiskey and rum caught fire, creating an inferno that would burn for a week and claim 19 lives, all of them firefighters and salvage workers. The fire started innocuously enough in a tobacco store, but when it spread to the whiskey bond next door, it became a monster. Barrels of alcohol exploded like bombs, shooting jets of flaming whiskey across streets. The heat was so intense it melted cars 3 blocks away and cracked windows half a mile distant. What the newspapers didn't report was the chaos of the rescue effort. Firefighters were sent in without proper breathing apparatus because it was only a warehouse fire. When the first explosions occurred, men were trapped in a labyrinth of burning barrels with no escape route mapped. The fire service later admitted they had no plan for tackling bonded warehouse fires, despite Glasgow having dozens of them. The real scandal: insurance companies initially refused to pay out, claiming the fire service's excessive use of water caused more damage than the flames. Meanwhile, streets ran with rivers of burning alcohol, creating surreal scenes of flaming gutters that witnesses said looked like hell's own tributaries. November 5th, 1967. While Britain celebrated Guy Fawkes Night, a packed Sunday evening train derailed at Hither Green in South London, killing 49 passengers and injuring 78. The cause? A broken rail that British Rail had known about but classified as non-urgent maintenance. The 7:43 p.m. from Hastings was doing 70 miles per hour when it hit the fractured rail. 11 coaches derailed, with several rolling down the embankment. The third coach was crushed to half its original length. Survivors described the sound as like the world ending, carriages grinding against each other in the darkness, mixed with screams and shattering glass. Here's the bit that got buried. British Rail had received multiple reports of rough riding at that exact spot. A maintenance gang had even marked it for attention. But in classic 1960s fashion, the repair was scheduled for the next convenient maintenance window, which turned out to be 3 days after the crash. The subsequent inquiry revealed British Rail's maintenance was understaffed by 30%. Track workers were doing 18-hour shifts and signing off inspections they hadn't actually completed. The Minister of Transport tried to blame it on an act of God, which prompted one survivor to ask if God was now responsible for British Rail's maintenance schedules. Speaking of explosive revelations, we're about to uncover a railway disaster where investigators found evidence of sabotage that was immediately classified. But first, if you're learning things about 1960s Britain that your history teachers never mentioned, drop a comment below sharing your own memories or family stories from this era. October 25th, 1960. 2 tanker barges lost in thick fog on the River Severn struck the Severn Railway Bridge's pier. The collision brought down 2 spans of the bridge just as a freight train was approaching. 5 men died as their locomotive plunged into the river. The controversy: the bridge had no warning system. Despite being a crucial link carrying oil trains to a nearby refinery, British Rail had deemed fog warnings unnecessarily expensive. The bitter irony is that the oil company had offered to pay for a warning system just months before, but railway bureaucrats rejected it as setting a dangerous precedent. What really happened in those final moments was heroic and heartbreaking. The signalman at Lydney Junction saw the bridge signals fail and ran along the track with a red lamp, but the fog was too thick. The engine driver, Bob Tasker, saw the gap too late, but still threw the brakes and ordered his firemen to jump. Tasker stayed at his post trying to stop the train and paid with his life. While not uniquely British, the Hong Kong flu pandemic killed between 30,000 and 40,000 Britons between 1968 and 1970, more than all the other disasters in this list combined. Yet, it's barely remembered. Why? Because dying of flu wasn't dramatic enough for headlines, and society simply accepted mass death from disease as inevitable. The virus arrived in Britain in late 1968, just as the NHS was struggling with winter pressures and funding constraints. Hospitals were overwhelmed with cases, routine operations were cancelled, and in some areas morgue capacity was exceeded. The virus particularly targeted the elderly and those with chronic conditions, but also killed many healthy young adults. The government's response was notably hands-off. Health Secretary Kenneth Robinson advised maintaining normal routines and avoiding panic. Here's the shocking part. Britain had experience from the 1957 Asian flu pandemic, which killed 14,000 people, but few lessons were implemented. Vaccines existed, but production was limited and distribution chaotic. Priority was given to healthcare workers and essential services, but even this was inconsistently applied. Many hospitals reported staff absence rates of 15 to 20% at the pandemic's peak, crippling their ability to cope. The pandemic exposed deep inequalities. Wealthy areas had better access to healthcare and lower death rates, while industrial cities like Manchester and Birmingham saw morgues overflowing. The government deliberately downplayed figures to avoid panic, leading to accusations they were managing death rather than preventing it. This forgotten pandemic killed more Britons than the Blitz, yet it merited barely a footnote in our collective memory. December 22, 1963. The Greek cruise liner Laconia, carrying 651 passengers and 385 crew, many of them British tourists excited for Christmas cruises, caught fire 180 miles north of Madeira. The disaster claimed 128 lives and exposed catastrophic failures in maritime safety that the shipping industry had hidden for years. The fire started in the hairdressing salon around 11 p.m. when a faulty heater ignited lacquer fumes. Within 30 minutes, flames had spread through the ship's ventilation system. Passengers found emergency exits locked or blocked. Lifeboats couldn't be lowered because davits had been painted over during cosmetic refurbishments, and crew members panicked. British survivors reported scenes of chaos. Crew members fighting passengers for lifeboat spaces, officers abandoning their posts, and no organised evacuation procedure. The ship's captain initially refused to send a distress signal for nearly an hour, hoping to control the fire and avoid maritime insurance complications. When rescue ships arrived, they found lifeboats half empty while people still jumped from the burning vessel. Many victims died not from fire but from drowning after jumping into the Atlantic in December or from exposure in overcrowded life rafts. The most damning revelation came during the inquiry. The ship had passed Greek safety inspections despite having non-functional sprinkler systems, fire doors that had been welded open for passenger convenience, and lifeboats that hadn't been properly tested in years. The Greek maritime authorities had essentially rubber-stamped inspections in exchange for registration fees. The Laconia disaster directly led to major reforms in the International Convention for Safety of Life at Sea. October 10, 1957 saw Britain's worst nuclear accident when pile number 1 at Windscale, now Sellafield, caught fire, releasing radioactive material across the UK and Europe. While technically just before the 1960s, its cover-up extended well into the decade, making it a defining tragedy of the era. The government suppressed the full scale of contamination for over 30 years. The fire burned for 3 days, releasing radioactive iodine-131, cesium-137, and xenon-133 into the atmosphere. The radioactive plume spread across northern England and reached as far as Germany. Milk from cows grazing within 200 square miles was destroyed, over 2 million litres poured away, though the evacuation zone should have been much larger based on contamination levels discovered decades later. Here's what they hid. Cancer rates in Cumbria showed suspicious spikes throughout the 1960s, but health records were classified. Workers who fought the fire, many without proper protection, suffered elevated cancer rates, but compensation claims were routinely denied. The government blamed natural background radiation for health issues. Internal documents released in the 1980s revealed officials knew the contamination was far worse than admitted, but feared public panic about Britain's nuclear weapons programme. The inquiry report by Sir William Penny was so damning that Prime Minister Harold Macmillan ordered it suppressed. The published version removed chapters detailing safety failures and management incompetence. Whistleblowers who tried to speak out faced prosecution under the Official Secrets Act. Scientists estimate the disaster caused at least 240 cancer cases, though the government has never accepted liability. The fire fundamentally changed nuclear safety protocols worldwide, though British authorities learned this lesson at a terrible cost. These 9 tragedies share common themes that define 1960s Britain: institutional arrogance, profit over people, and a culture of covering up rather than learning from mistakes. The decade that gave us the Beatles and the miniskirt also showed us what happens when authorities value reputation over lives. What's perhaps most tragic is how many of these disasters were predicted and preventable. From Aberfan's unstable tip to the Laconia's locked fire doors, warning signs were ignored because addressing them would cost money or cause inconvenience. The pattern repeats: warnings dismissed, whistleblowers silenced, then sudden catastrophe followed by public inquiries that revealed what insiders knew all along. Yet from these dark moments came lasting change. Aberfan led to the mines and quarries. Tips Act 1969. The Cheapside Fire revolutionised firefighting procedures for chemical fires. Hither Green forced British Rail to address its maintenance crisis. Sometimes tragedy becomes the price of progress. If you've made it this far, you're clearly someone who believes in remembering the past to improve the future. Subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell. We regularly uncover forgotten stories and the heroes whose names deserve remembering. Share this video with anyone who lived through the 60s, because if we forget these tragedies, we dishonour not just the dead, but the lessons they died to teach us. Until next time, keep questioning the official story.